So, welcome back to another episode. Today, we get to talk about one of our favorite series, and that is the Grandia Series. So here we go.
So the very first Grandia was released initially in 1997 in Japan on the Sega Saturn and Saturn only.
Yeah, and it was actually touted as being a Final Fantasy VII killer. That's what Sega wanted this to be, and that's what Game Arts wanted it to be, because that's the company that actually created Grandia.
A fun story with this is that I happened to be visiting Japan for the very first time, visiting my sister in 1997, and in the town she was at, I went the very first night to the grocery store, and they actually had an electronics section, and there was this TV set up with a demo game that was Grandia. I didn't know what it was at the time. I'd never heard of it or seen it before. I played it for about 10 minutes and thought it was fantastic, but it wasn't until many years later I'd find out exactly what I had been playing.
So Grandia came out to quite the fanfare. It wasn't quite the Final Fantasy killer that, Game Arts was expecting, but it was a million-seller title. So in 1999, Sony brings over Grandia for the North American shores. And it's good. Is it as good as the Sega Saturn version? Not really. Now there's a lot of graphical differences. So strangely enough, the graphics take a bit of a dive on the PlayStation, sadly, but it is still a really good game. It introduces to Justin, Fina, and Sue. And it was a really great game. Wasn't this a fantastic game when it first came out? Oh my god.
When it first came out, I was so excited, and I got it for the Christmas the year it came out. And I remember sitting down, putting it in and playing it. And the first things that hit me and that captivated me were the story that started with innocent beginnings with a bunch of kids playing and growing into this amazing adventure. And the fact that it was just so refreshing.
You know what? I gotta agree with you that I love the innocence of Grandia, of those kids, and I think anybody who plays the original Grandia knows that you do, as you said, start off as these kids and you see them grow, and it's a really awesome progression, and it's such a RPG of innocence to begin with that you don't see. A lot of the RPGs, like Final Fantasy, you start off, it's really dark, it's really broody, it's awesome, but Grandia was a breath of fresh air in that respect, that it was colorful, it was bright, it was cheerful to begin with, and it went very serious at the end, and that was awesome. That was what was so great about Grandia.
Now, I just really quickly want to touch on something here for the gameplay of these games. Aside from the standard, you have your items and your weapons and your armor and your spells and everything else, the magic system was incredibly cool. The more you used the spells, the stronger they would get, and they would be able to change and grow with your characters. But overall, the combat engine in this game is one of the best, if not the best, I have ever played on.
So we fast forward now to the Dreamcast era, and Sega really needed an RPG on their system, and they got it with Grandia 2.
There have been a couple of other RPGs released before this for the Dreamcast, but they didn't have that true JRPG soul that a lot of hardcore fans wanted, and that's where this game came in. It was amazingly heavily anticipated, and for good reason. It brought back the same combat engine and a lot of the same feel of the first Grandia, with new characters and a new, incredibly encompassing storyline.
Grandia 2 was a lot different than Grandia 1. And I enjoyed it, I liked it, but I still enjoyed the first game a little bit more. They'd kind of changed the direction of it. It wasn't as innocent as the first game was, but it was still an excellent RPG on the Dreamcast.
Now, sadly, the Dreamcast was a bit more of a niche console, so in 2002, Grandia 2 was re-released on the PlayStation 2 for a wider audience to enjoy. There were some subtle differences, some not so subtle. The most obvious of which was that there were some graphical glitches that appeared in the PlayStation 2 version that weren't in the Dreamcast one. So the purists really like the Dreamcast version better, but all in all, it's the exact same game. Same music, same animation, same characters, everything else.
So now we get into one of the spin-offs in the Grandia series, and that is Grandia Extreme on the PlayStation 2.
2002 was a hallmark year for Grandia fans because they not only got the PS2 re-release of Part 2, but Grandia Extreme. And Grandia Extreme was different. It had the same combat system, it had the same magic system, all of the key elements and the nuts and bolts were still there. The difference was it was a side story centered around one town and several dungeons.
And also, it actually had some kind of crazy voice acting, right?
Yeah, I have to admit, the voice acting wasn't necessarily my favorite in this game, but one of the big selling points was that it had Mark Hamill and Lisa Loeb doing the voices of two of the main characters.
And with mixed results, we'll say.
Yeah.
So after Grandia Extreme, I thought that was the end of the Grandia franchise. I didn't think we'd hear any more about it. I was proven wrong because Game Arts released Grandia 3, published by Square Enix on the PS2 over here, and it was a big surprise. I like this game. I thought it was really, really good.
The storyline on this one was much more grown up and much more serious from the get-go. It was a bit slower paced and for a more grown-up palette. The character designs and the art were still stellar and fantastic and still retained a lot of the feel of the series. The music, as always, was fantastic, and the combat system was still the same, the one that I love so much. The major differences that could be seen were because it was being done partly by Square Enix, and they are big fans of level grinding. There's more of that, shall we say, required in this game than there was in the rest of the series. But for fans of that and for fans of the Square Enix style, they could see the flavors of it mixing with Grandia for a wonderful result.
But you're right, it was very different. I remember getting to an area in Grandia 3, and it was like, my characters would get decimated. And I'm like, holy cow, like, I actually had to go back and majorly level to get back into this new area. So yeah, it was a little bit taxing at times, but yes, I agree, a very good game. So that gets us up to date with the Grandia series. Now, we mentioned Grandia Extreme as being a spin-off of the series. There's actually two other games that are spin-offs as well.
The first one I want to mention is Grandia Digital Museum that was released in 1998 on the Saturn in Japan.
And it was a bonus disc.
It was a bonus disc that had 4 dungeons that brought back Justin, Fina, and Sue and had them collecting artifacts that they could give back to the museum in the game that would then unlock bonuses for you about the game and about its world.
Yeah, I remember you can unlock saves for the original Grandia in this game in this bonus disc. The last spin-off is Parallel Trippers, and this was created by Game Arts. It was published by Hudson in 2000, and it was released on the Game Boy Color in Japan only, sadly. This is a game that we never got.
The basic premise is that there are 2 average ordinary school kids from, our universe that are out playing in a shed outside of their school that ends up being a vortex pulling them into the Grandia world. In order to get home, they have to go on a big quest to find some keys that'll let them do so, and they're joined by the cast of the original Grandia, Justin, Fina, and Sue.
Yeah, unusual plot, very unusual.
So now, no video game series review would be complete for us without mentioning the music.
The music. And the music of Grandia is a huge subject. It is fantastic. It has never failed to disappoint. Right from the first game, right to the last game here. Unbelievable. And I want to gush about the first game's music for a second. Now, what they did in Grandia 1, which was really different for the time, was for a lot of the background music, they just had beats. They just used drums at times. Yeah. And it was very atmospheric. A lot of it wasn't, orchestrated music. It was just this beats going on in the background, and very atmospheric, very different, and they really took a chance, and I think it really paid off and created for a really memorable soundtrack for Grandia 1.
The rest of the series was always up to the same high quality standard of music. The soundtracks were always very unique. They always had their own flavor, but it was a flavor distinctly Grandia. I've always enjoyed listening to the music from all of these, the combat themes especially.
Oh, combat themes are awesome. I still listen to those still to this day. So before we finish this review, I want to show you guys one of my most prized possessions, my sketch of Justin. So back in 2000, I was at Anime Expo, and I ran into the character designer of Grandia. I followed him, actually, if you would actually like to believe that. And I tracked him down and I said, listen man, I said, I'm such a huge fan of Grandia. Can I get a sketch of Justin? And he was nice enough to do this for me. So I am really, really happy to have this item. I think it's just awesome. Big part of my collection. Just being such a fan of Grandia is so wonderful to have an item like this. So guys, we just wanted to gush about the original Grandia here. Talk about all the games in the series and some of the spin-offs, talk about how much we enjoy it. So anyways guys, until next time.